Hello, everyone. We're back with Exploring World History, lesson number 23, and we're going to be talking about Moses, okay? And we start with Moses' early life. If you remember, he was born in Egypt to Amram, his mom, and Jochebed, his dad, from the tribe of Levi, okay? But he was born during this time where the Pharaoh was tired of the Israelites. He was concerned about their numbers, and he was trying to get rid of them ultimately. And so he had ordered all male children at the time of Moses' birth to be killed. But his mom didn't do that. She put him in a basket and put him in the river, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter and raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Okay? At 40 years old, he sees a Hebrew being beaten by an Egyptian, and he defends him and kills the Egyptian. And at this point, the Pharaoh was upset and thought, wanted to kill him. So Moses flees to the land of Midian. There he met a family of Ravel, the priest of the Midians, and he married Zipporah. He was the first one of the priest's daughters, okay? And at this point, he's living his life. He has a couple sons. He's the, a shepherd. He's just kind of living life. And he's a shepherd for this priest. And then he gets to be 80 years old. And, so he's been living there as a shepherd with his wife and his kids, his father-in-law for about 20 years, or 40 years rather. And suddenly God calls Moses from a burning bush. And that's a story you should read in the Bible. And he tells him to return to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh to let his people go. He, this is real brief, and hopefully you've heard these stories a lot and you'll read them and learn more about them as we continue to do this study. But he gets to Egypt, and the Pharaoh doesn't want to let the people go. So God, through Moses, puts plagues on the Egyptians, and eventually the Israelites are allowed to leave. Moses leads them into the desert, and he's setting out to the promised land. They get to this promised land where he sent spies into the land to give them a report of what they needed to do. And unfortunately, they don't trust God, and they say it's going to be too difficult. We can't get into the promised land right now. And as a result, they're not allowed to go in at that point. They're forced to wander the desert for another 40 years. And that's where Moses is wound up going to die, in the desert. Okay? So the life of Moses was guided by the hand of God. How so, you might say? Well, from this very beginning of his life, all male children were supposed to be killed, but he survived death as a baby. Not only survived death as a baby, but then went on to live life luxuriously in the temple, or with Pharaoh and his daughters. He also survived death and escaped from Egypt twice, after the killing of the Egyptian and then after the plagues. He survived life in the desert. All these things show how God's hand was guiding Moses and helping Moses. Moses was also a very reluctant leader. He did not accept leadership willingly. He gave God a series of excuses, said, "Who am I to do this?" In Exodus 3, he says that. And then he's like, "Well, what should I tell the Israelites about who sent me? I don't even know." And he starts, "Well, what if they don't listen to me, God?" And he keeps going on and on. At one point, he says to God, "I am not eloquent. I can't speak well. I'm slow of speech and of tongue." And, eventually God sends his brother to help him with these things. But then he says, "Lord, send whoever you want." After all these excuses, he finally gives in and says, "God, your way is probably best. You do whoever you want." Also, Moses was an intercessor for others. He spent his whole entire life interceding for others. He helped the fellow Israelite that was getting beaten back in Egypt, right when he had to flee. He helped the daughters of the priest. He pleaded with God for the Egyptians during the plagues. And he pleaded for the Israelites in the desert. Over and over, he pleaded for the Israelites in the desert. All these things show that Moses had a very close relationship with God. Okay? Other things that show this, that he had a close relationship with God. In Exodus 33, verse 11, it says that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. He was also allowed to see the back of God, right? And it changed his face as he came down out of the mountain. He was glowing. And then there's, Moses' spiritual growth. Initially, he was very reluctant to do what God was asking him to do, but eventually he went boldly to Pharaoh, right? He learned that there was a time to pray and a time for action. And this sometimes can be very challenging for Christians in today's world, because there is a time to pray, but there is also a time for action. Okay? In your book on page 113, it says this. Moses struggled deeply with the Israelites' lack of faith. At times he rebuked them, at times he complained about them to the Lord, and at other times he interceded to God on their behalf. It takes a person of great maturity to be able to separate the sin from the sinner, to rebuke sin when necessary, but to pray for someone out of a heart of concern when prayer is needed. So that was also another important lesson and thing that we can learn from Moses' spiritual growth. And lastly, he learned the art of delegation, working with godly people, and it's something that we need to do and be able to do as you're working on maybe group projects or working with your brothers and sisters or things at church. We all need to learn to work together. Lastly, I want to read this to you. It says this. When Moses had outlined the choice they faced of following or rejecting God, he said, I call heaven and earth to witness again against you today, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants. Moses laid down his life to serve his people, even though they did not appreciate him and often complained about what he did. He showed that he was able to rise above such pettiness, and in so doing, he set an example that many generations after him would appreciate and honor. God showed his wisdom in choosing Moses to be the leader of the Israelites at the most critical time in their history. The world is different because of what he did. Thank you.